Hello, I'm Jody Gale, Extension Agent with Utah State University Extension Service. Often in the landscape you'll have trees that tend to get too large, or at least limbs that are too large and need to be trimmed in order to accommodate vehicle traffic or prevent shade on other trees that are growing nearby. Often the tendency is to use a chainsaw on these types of branches, which can easily be done to remove large branches. But there's a specific technique called the double cut, which is a way to prevent damage from the limb tearing away from the tree. If this particular branch here were to be cut off in a single cut method, the tendency is to come with a saw and, beginning at the top, cut down through the surface of the branch. What happens is when the bark is left intact on the underneath side of the limb, as the weight of the limb brings the tree limb down, that will tend to split and it will tear the bark and strip it all the way down the trunk, damaging the trunk rather severely. By using the double cut method, you score the bark on the underneath side of the limb, cut off most of the weight of the limb and allowing it to fall away, and then make a final cut that's clean and easy to make, that does not damage the underneath side of the limb and tear the bark off from the trunk. I'll demonstrate that now. Using a standard pruning saw, which is very different than a carpenter saw. Carpenter saws are intended to cut when you push. This is just a typical small keyhole saw designed for a carpentry purpose. The teeth are very small and they're designed to cut when you push. Whereas a standard pruning saw has very coarse teeth on it. It's designed to cut when you pull. Often if you're working overhead, it's much easier to use the weight of your body and the effect of gravity to pull down, making the cut, rather than to try and use your muscle strength to push up. Pruning saws are also characterized by a round or a curvy type design rather than a straight blade, making it a lot easier to work with round limbs. So let's begin the double cut method. The double cut method begins by making a cut on the underneath side of the branch further out on the limb than where you want the final cut to be. You start by making a cut and you cut approximately 1/3 of the distance up into the limb in this manner. We have severed the bark and the tissue on the underneath side of the limb, and then you begin the second of the double cut, not at the same location where the cut is, but you move out on the branch maybe 2 or 3 inches. The idea here is that as you begin to cut down, the weight of the branch will start to fall away. It will usually tend to split down into this previous cut, and then the whole limb will fall away without tearing the bark and causing damage to the tree. So this is the second of the 2 cuts in the double cut method. You can see how that quickly fell away without tearing the bark on the underneath side. The third or final cut is now just simply to deal with this small piece of wood. It doesn't have many hundreds of pounds of weight of wood on it. It's much easier to care for and much easier to make the cut. We're now down to the final step of removing the stub that's left from the main part of the limb. I will take the time to make just a small scoring cut here, just in case this falls away a little quicker than I would like. Notice this bulge where the limb is attached to the trunk. This is referred to as the limb collar. It's okay to cut part way into that limb collar, but one of the problems with pruning is you don't want to cut way back really tight against the trunk, because that makes a very large wound. Nor do you want to cut a 90-degree angle here in the small direction. By cutting here, this part of the bark will just simply die anyway. So you kind of go halfway between the extremes, between this 90-degree, what would be a 90-degree angle cut versus this very long cut, and go halfway in between by coming down partially through this limb collar where you've got tissue that's actively cell dividing and that will quickly heal over the wound. Okay, at this point in the cutting, where this is cut most of the way through, if the weight of the limb were still there, this would already have broken off and stripped and torn the bark down the tree. We're almost finished, and with not a lot of weight here, makes it much easier to finish the third and final cut. Even though it's called the double cut method, it actually consists of 3 primary cuts, this being the final cut. Okay, there it is. That handsaw wore me out. Another way to do a double cut method is with a pole saw or a small chainsaw. Many homeowners don't have this type of equipment, but it can often be rented from rental stores that are scattered throughout the state. As always, you should, anytime you're using power equipment, use proper safety glasses, hearing protection, sturdy shoes, and have long pants on that will protect your legs. This particular limb will use the same technique, making a cut on the underneath side, approximately 1/3 of the way into the branch, going out on the limb a couple of inches, making the second cut, allowing the limb to fall away, and make the final flush cut against the tree that will allow it to heal. A much easier way to make the double cut. Have your final cut that will heal over much easier from the edges. Thank you for joining us for this segment of pruning in the yard.